Leadership is very often about serving, and service rarely comes smoothly or easily. One of our role models as leaders is Jesus. He served all the way until they killed him. At times things will appear to go wrong, and things can go wrong for a whole range of different reasons. It might be our own mistakes. It may be we have done something wrong. It may be other people's mistakes. It may be other people's intentions. It can be that there are systems of power that are in place that are making things the way that they are. I believe that there is an enemy out there who is trying to make life difficult for us. If we want to change systems that are wrong, there will be opposition, there will be powers against us. And so it's important that we think about some of these risks, some of these pitfalls that are there, maybe so that we can avoid them, or certainly so that we can pick ourselves up better afterwards. What is failure? Well, for many people, failure is just when they look bad, or when they feel bad, or when something bad happens because of what they have done, or maybe something good fails to happen because of what they have done or not done. But hopefully, within the context of leadership, we should see that leadership, failure is about when the mission or the vision is not being progressed as it should. Either efficiency-wise, it's not happening fast enough or well enough, or because of values, because there's maybe some moral issue. And some people think, well, it's okay, everybody screws up from time to time, so why should I worry about this? And so it can be rather tempting for us to allow our standards, our quality standards, to slip. But I believe that God holds people, especially leaders, to high standards of behavior. There's been a survey done to look at why leaders have failed at different times. And when we look through these, the leader emphasized authority of their leadership and excessively used their title. They were unwilling to give humble service. They thought that they had all of the answers instead of asking questions. They were not connecting with the actual person who was their employee. Maybe they were unclear about visions and expectations. It could be an inability to organize actually the details of what needed to be done in a position of leadership. Maybe there was a lack of personal integrity. Sometimes there can be fear of competition from followers. If I don't do a good job, they'll promote one of my others and I'll be out of a job. And that fear eats away at us until eventually we fail. Sometimes people just stop learning, stop growing, because they think that they've made it. They've got to that position. They don't need to work any harder. Sometimes they just rely on gut feelings instead of looking for evidence or for asking people. And sometimes it can just be because of a lack of imagination that people fail. I wonder if actually some of the common threads in why leaders fail, I think that it can be to do with pride. It can be to do with two things, pride and failure. First of all, pride. Just think for a moment, do you know or feel strong in certain areas? Okay, well that's good to know about your strengths, but those strengths can also be weaknesses. And so sometimes it's good to just think through, I know that I have a strength in this area. How can that actually also be a weakness that might lead to my failure? Similarly, as I said, fear is the other one. And it's good just to think about, what is it that you fear? And very often in positions of leadership, fears often revolve around opinions of other people. And I just challenge you, whose opinion matters the most to you? If different people had different opinions about you, which one is the one that really affects you? Maybe you have been wounded. Maybe you have been you are now overly sensitive in some areas because you've run into trouble before. Maybe you want to think about which are some of the areas that you are not good at taking criticism. Well, the fact is that from time to time we are going to fail. That happens. And so what we need to do is to think, how do we bounce back? When I kind of did a little bit of research on this and found that Google came up with a bunch of ideas on how to bounce back from a failure. And they said, number one, you have to be honest with your supervisors. When you have made a mistake, own up to it quickly. The sooner the better that you get honest with your boss. Don't go pouring out an endless list of excuses as to why this happened. That is not going to impress them. It does not help them. It doesn't help you to bounce back. Instead, you want to come with a suggestion or two of how you can fix this problem. Don't go putting the blame onto other people. But do recognize, at least with yourself and maybe in a conversation with your boss, that actually there can also be a silver lining to this cloud. Sometimes out of a bad situation, something good can come. And it's important, at least for yourself, to recognize that and to acknowledge it, to own it, and to use it, to value it. Because hopefully, in any kind of failure that you experience, it can be an opportunity for you to grow and for you to become a better manager or leader. Having looked at Google, I then turned to the Bible as well, and I found Peter as being one of the characters who had a significant failure at one point in his life where he denied knowing Jesus. He was under some pressure and he didn't want to acknowledge. And he screwed up. He got it wrong. But he also did three things very right. And the three things that I think he did right was that he grieved. He let his friends come around him and support him, and he accepted God's mercy. Now, what do I mean by these? Well, grieving. Sometimes we pretend that it didn't really happen. We try and rationalize it. We find reasons for why it happened and so on. And sometimes actually, no, we just have to say, and feel the pain. In order to get past a failure, sometimes we have to kind of go through it and recognize the reality. I screwed up, or that person got me. I've got to get past this. When Peter heard the rooster, he cried bitterly. Healing is part of God's mercy, and it takes time. I imagine that Peter, maybe for some time later, whenever he heard a rooster crow, probably that reminded him of his failure. It takes time to get past these things. Peter then allowed his friends to support him. Over the time of Easter, whilst Jesus was in the grave, Peter didn't stop meeting with his friends. He chose not to isolate himself, which is what we sometimes do when we think that we have failed. Peter chose to be with his close friends, to allow them to speak into his life and to encourage him. This is earth. It's not heaven yet. We're going to have difficult times, and it's important that we lean on one another, that we support them and they can support us. And then thirdly, he accepted God's mercy. He cast himself on God's mercy. Now, cast isn't to throw up into the air. It's it's simply to drop the burden that we are carrying. Sometimes we just have to say, there is no way that I deserve your love, but you are a merciful God, and I simply fall before you. In fact, Jesus had actually told Peter in advance. He knew that Satan was going to mess with him, and that Peter would fail. But it was still right for Peter to come back to God, and in fact to Jesus. God is never surprised by our success or by our failures. God is interested in us. He loves us. He expects us to recover with his help. You shouldn't allow your failure to define you. If we do that, we're giving in, we're quitting. Instead, we need to allow God's mercy to bring us past through that failure and out the other side. Wounds, they can heal. Sometimes they will leave scars. Just don't go picking at them. Let them be. Learn from those mistakes, and move on. When we looked at the process of how people learn, do you remember? First of all, thinking about, you have to instill a sense of wanting to learn and needing to learn, and then putting it into practice, so they learn by doing, and then giving time for them to make sense of what they're learning, and then there's some sort of feedback to ensure that they learn from what they have been working on. Well, actually, you could do the same when there has been a failure. It is an opportunity for us to learn, particularly if we take the time to make sense of it, and we go through that feedback process of, well, what went right, what went wrong, what am I going to do different next time? There's one very inspiring rower. He's an Olympic rower, so he's an athlete, and he realized that if he exercised and built his body and rode and worked as hard as he could, up to the point where he was still okay, he didn't grow, he didn't develop further, and he realized he was staying inside his comfort zone. And so he has developed this new way of thinking where he says, every single day I'm going to push some part of my life past where, not just past where I'm comfortable, but past where I can actually manage, and I'm going to move into that place where I fail. I'm going to keep pushing all the way until I actually fail. Because failure isn't a problem. Failure just means that now I know where the line is, and that grows his internal strength. It grows his comfort zone, and he knows that next time he can do more. I thought that was a very interesting philosophy of choosing to, every single day, to choose at least one thing where you say, I'm going to push this past what I'm comfortable with. I'm going to keep going all the way until I actually fail. Then I will have learned something from that. I think that's a very interesting philosophy to take into life, and very applicable to leadership.